Hi, my name's Chris Pope. I'm the executive director of CG Charitable, and I wanted to take a couple of minutes to explain the purpose of this data request because the overall purpose is to communicate reality as clearly as possible and in a way that allows us to make comparisons between the organizations that we're evaluating. And that's pretty different from the legal and accounting worlds that might have their own objectives of legal compliance or minimizing risk or optimizing taxes or getting government benefits. And pursuing those different objectives can create situations that we find confusing and that make it seem like we don't really understand what's going on with the organization. So the first thing to understand is that this document isn't a legal document or a financial document, and it's open to meet CG Charitable's objectives other than these financial and legal objectives that might make things a little more complicated. We do need to see legal documents and we need to be able to reconcile back to financial documents, but we have a lot of flexibility to report things in a different way, and so we'll ask you to do that at times. And I wanted to give some examples of ways that some organizations report things where we've had to ask them to change it. For example, there was an organization that omitted their highest paid person and said they weren't an employee because they were a 1099 contractor, even though it was their executive director and they definitely were their highest paid employee. And we asked them to please count them as an employee. There was another organization that said that they didn't own the building that they were using to administer their programs, but then we found out that they had 4 different legal entities, and one of those legal entities absolutely owned the building. And in that same case, they said that building was a U.S. asset, even though it was located in Uganda. So we asked them to please move the location of the asset to Uganda. There's another organization that said that an employee was a US-based employee because that's where their pay came from, even though they lived and worked in Guatemala, and we told them that we saw them as a Guatemalan employee and asked them to move them over to Guatemala. There's another organization that said, we think that this is program spending because we think it helps Guatemalans and it should be counted as Guatemalan spending, even though when we understood the program better, it was Americans making presentations in US schools. And so we said this is a US expense and needs to be recorded there. There was another entity that accounted for expenses as liabilities for tax reasons, but as we dug into what those liabilities are, they weren't liabilities by any common definition of the term, they were expenses, and so we asked them to account for them differently. There's a lot of examples like this, and these experiences have pushed us toward creating the document that you have in front of you. And so answering the questions that we're asking is going to require a lot of subjective decisions on your part, and we hope that you'll be able to make those decisions by considering what's going to help us really understand how your organization operates in the physical world, which might be different from the way the legal world or accounting world sees things. And because we're using numbers to tell a story, it's possible to overemphasize precision. We do ask a lot of questions, but we really don't want you or your accountant or someone on your team to spend dozens of hours trying to precisely calculate everything down to the last detail. The totals on the data request are going to need to equal the totals on your financials, but a lot of the ways that we look at things can be estimated. And the guiding principle, I think, is for you to ask yourself, if you come up with a more precise number and spend more time, is the story being told by the numbers going to change? And if not, and your best estimate is going to be basically the same message as the 20-hour story, then go ahead and estimate and don't spend the 20 hours. Having said that, the story does need to make sense, and it's been clear in the past that some organizations haven't paid very close attention and they ended up providing us numbers that contradicted one another or were really unlikely or that went against the things that we knew to be true from other sources. And so while we want you to not spend an inordinate amount of time on this. We do want you to balance estimating with accuracy and common sense. Thank you.